Good afternoon, Trinity Tigers. We're welcoming today our alumni from San Antonio to New York, to Canada, to Seattle, to Los Angeles, and all points in between on the map. Thanks for being here with us. This is our Trinity Together live webinar series, part of our lifelong learning initiatives here at Trinity University's Office of Alumni Relations. I'm Bob Scheer, proud to serve as the Dean of the School of Business here at Trinity University. And it's my pleasure today to introduce today's webinar speaker, Ben Gurwitz, class of 2002. Ben's a financial advisor at Financial Life Advisors here in San Antonio. Today, you'll learn from Ben's discussion and presentation more about retirement planning and how to prepare for emotional transition into retirement, Social Security claiming considerations, the importance of having a distribution strategy in retirement, mortgage in retirement, paying them off and reverse mortgages, planning for incapacity and death, estate documents to consider, and much, much more information. I had the pleasure of working with Ben and collaborating with Ben in his two Learning Together podcast series over the summer. And I know the information you'll receive, the profitability of that will be well worth your effort in sticking with us and participating in the discussion. Please know that you'll be able to submit your questions as you listen to Mr. Gurwitz throughout the presentation today, and he'll be happy to answer your questions following the presentation. However, if you do have a question which seems relevant to the material Ben's presenting, please send it in at any time, and we'll see if we can address that during Ben's presentation. So Ben, welcome to Learning Together webinar series.
Thanks, Dean. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in, talk about some of the basic considerations while you're thinking about retirement. Go ahead and start right with the emotional side of retirement. And I think this is a piece that a lot of people forget about when they're contemplating retirement. They oftentimes get focused solely on the numbers. But there's a big change when you retire. You have spent your whole life accumulating assets. Every month you put money into your 401k, you put a little bit in savings, and you lived off of your income. But the income came in as long as you had a job. But in retirement, you don't have that necessarily anymore. You may have a pension, Social Security, some income coming in, but it's definitely a switch because you need to start distributing those assets. And psychologically, that's a big change, and it elicits a lot of fear and makes people uncomfortable. You know, I can't tell you how many times after a client has retired, they come into the office because the stock market had a bad week, and so they draw a mental trend line. Well, if I'm taking out this much per month and the market went down this much this week, if that line continues, I'll be out of money in 3 years and I'll have to go back to work. Well, that invariably is not the way it works, but people will sort of be irrational and emotional. So know that when that happens, it's normal and it's also generally temporary. I kind of equate it to when you graduated college. I remember the shock of going from 15 hours a week that I had to be somewhere to being there 40 to 50 hours a week, and from not having 3 months of vacation to having 2 weeks of vacation. And when I had children, a similar shift in my life. Everything about it changed, how I spend money, how I spend my time, and a similar thing happens in retirement. You're going to have a big change in routine from when you go do things, who you interact with. Just know that all change, like when you start a new job, it's uncomfortable, but generally about 6 months into retirement, most people have reversed back to their normal patterns of sort of happiness and comfort with life. And in retirement, there's definitely a purpose that you have to have. You can't go into retirement thinking, oh, I don't have to work, I'm just going to sit on the couch or on the rocking chair. That doesn't work. Human beings need engagement. We need social interaction. We need purpose in life. Physical activity. Studies have shown that people who are the most physically active actually have the lowest incidence of dementia and Alzheimer's. Because physical activity is more important than mental activity. It's good for emotional well-being, health, longevity. And social interaction, staying connected. Another big indicator of people who are happy and live a long time are keeping those social connections with other people. You don't want to be an isolated recluse in retirement. It just is not good for your mental state and your outcome. And I often get asked all the time, how much money is enough? And that depends. That's my favorite answer to any question. It depends. The most important thing to identify are your goals. So when you're thinking about your goals, what does that mean? Some clients I have really like to travel, or have wanted to restore a classic car, or want to have a vacation house. Some travel a lot and work and don't want to travel anywhere. It just depends. The real question is, what do you want to do? And until you understand what you need your resources to do for you, it's really hard to answer the question, do you have enough? Another big consideration, besides how much you plan to spend, is what are your sources of income? Is all of your income coming from the stock market, from bonds, from securities? Something that can go up and down and doesn't provide a regular source of income, or some of it guaranteed? If you have a pension, Social Security, those sources of income aren't subject to the same swings as the stock market. They're guaranteed. They last for your lifetime. They potentially can be extended to last over a spouse's lifetime. So that the way you receive income can be a big indicator of how much additional money you might need to have a level of safety to meet all those goals. Another question is longevity. Another big unknown in retirement. How long are you going to live? The fastest growing demographic in the United States are centenarians. I have 2 grandmothers that are 95, and I hope that they make it to that demographic. But how long should you plan for? You can't go back to work at 90 and make an income. You probably can't go back to work at 80 and make an income. So you really need to go into retirement planning for a longer life, but you look at your family history, you look at your own personal medical history, and then science has been pushing us forward with longevity. There's a pretty high likelihood, if you have a retired couple of upper middle class or above, that one of them, when they get to retirement age, will live to 95. So you really need to think about a long retirement when you're planning for that. And then any special circumstances that may apply in your situation. A lot of people have not only health concerns, but they also may have family situations that might mean they need more money. Do they have to take care of a special needs child? Do they have to take care of parents? Or a special circumstance which could help, maybe they're in line to inherit a significant amount of money. Because I've had clients want to save enough money to pay for all of their goals on their own, and then they end up inheriting a significant amount of money. And I would hate for anybody to give up opportunities in life, the limited time we have, if they don't have to. So you want to think about all these things when you are trying to answer the question, do I have enough money to retire? Social Security is another big decision. You hear a lot about Social Security. Is it funded enough? When should I take Social Security? How does it work? There's all kinds of interactions. I could talk for a long time about Social Security, but we don't have all day, and we're going to touch on the most important parts. So when you earn a Social Security benefit, you can choose to take that benefit as early as 62. The normal retirement age, which is what your benefit's calculated off of, is currently for retirees 66, but will be moving to 67. That's the normal retirement age, and then you can delay retirement as late as age 70. And if you take it early, you get a reduction, and if you take it later, you get more money. The question is, if I wait longer and get more money, how much longer do I need to live to collect enough money to make up for the years I lost? Because if I collected at 62, I get payments for 8 more years than by waiting to 70. Well, what's that break-even point? And when you actually do a present value calculation, it's about 80 years old, which means if you are thinking about your own Social Security benefit, the break-even point is 80. So if you live longer than 80, you should delay, and if you're not going to make it till 80, you should take it early. Now, that's really easy to say. Nobody knows how long they're going to live, And there's more to that decision than simply that one calculation. Social Security also has some special features that you need to consider when you think about your plan. It's guaranteed income for life. And we'll stop and talk about the funding of Social Security here. If you look on your Social Security statement, right below your benefits, it'll have a statement that says, based on current projections, sometime in the early 2030s, Social Security will not have enough money to pay current benefits, and about 75% will be paid at that point, which is absolutely true. If nothing is done about Social Security, at some point when the Social Security Trust Fund runs out of its surplus, they'll have to cut benefits for all retirees. But when you think about it, most people feel very strongly about Social Security who are at or near or in Social Security. To cut somebody's benefits when they can't go back to work is politically very difficult. But even if they don't solve this problem and that happens, if you are struggling to retire on 100% of your Social Security benefit, it'll be even harder on 75% of that Social Security benefit. But Social Security is guaranteed for life under the current rules, so you can't outlive it. If you live a long time, you receive benefits. We already talked about age 80 being that break-even age. If you live beyond age 80, Social Security is to the plus by waiting, and the longer you live, the more longevity protection that Social Security provides for you. It's also adjusted to inflation. So as the cost of living goes up, Social Security goes up too. Obviously, with health insurance costs and other costs going up, it doesn't buy you a lot more in the marketplace, but having that inflation protection at least protects most of the purchasing power of that Social Security benefit. And it's a preferential tax item. When you receive income from a pension or from an investment, it's 100% taxable. But Social Security is not ever 100% taxable. It's at a maximum 85% taxable. So what that means is if you receive $1,000 a month from Social Security, the most you have to report on your tax return is 85% or $850. And if you don't have a lot of other sources of income in retirement, Social Security can be 0% taxable. So if you can have a benefit that you can't outlive, goes up with the cost of living, and potentially isn't taxed, that can be a very powerful part of your overall retirement strategy. And even clients that have significant savings are always surprised by how much Social Security plays a role in the strength of their financial plan. Additionally, if you're married, there are other benefits, or have children, there are other benefits of Social Security. So the most common situation with a spouse is that you are eligible for spousal benefits based on the work that your spouse has done. If you have a spouse who's never worked, they can still receive essentially half of the worker's benefit when they're full retirement age. And if somebody is to pass away, their benefit gets passed to a spouse. So it can be very important for the higher income earning spouse to delay until 70 to make sure that larger benefit passes to their spouse if they pass away first. You really want to think of, in a married couple, a combined benefit between the two and analyze it that way. And additionally, there's some benefits in Social Security specifically for taking care of family. If you pass away, there's some disability benefits. So I want to talk about pensions next. After you've made the Social Security decision, you may have a pension that you earned from government service, a private pension from a company. And when you receive those pensions, they're a great source of income. But if you receive a government pension that was received in lieu of paying Social Security, most common example today being school teachers. A lot of school teachers pay into a state retirement system and don't pay into Social Security. If that's the case, there's special rules that can potentially reduce your Social Security benefit because you didn't have to pay into it and you have another pension. The other thing to think about with pensions is they're not always adjusted to inflation. Some make up part of inflation, so they rise not quite as fast as the cost of living, and a lot of pensions don't have any increase. So if you receive a pension at age 60 or 65, the purchasing power of that pension will be a lot less if it doesn't have a cost of living adjustment when you're 80 or 85. And then survivor benefits are another consideration. When you're making a pension election in retirement, you're often allowed to extend that benefit to a spouse. And you can choose to give them 100% of the benefit or 50% of your benefit when you pass away, or 0% of the benefit. And it's like buying life insurance. You generally have to accept less every month to extend that benefit to your spouse. But when you think about providing security for both of you, regardless of who lives longer and how long they live, it can be a very important decision for extending that benefit to a spouse. A lot of people are worried about pensions failing. What happens if a company goes out of business and they can't, and their pension goes bankrupt? Pensions are held in trust and funded. You get a report on how well they're funded, but there have been situations where pensions have failed. But all private pensions have to pay into the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, and there's insured amounts. The insurance is not unlimited, and it depends on how old you are when you retire and how much you make. But just as an example, if you're 65 years old and you retire today, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation would insure about $5,500 a month. So if you had a $7,000 a month pension and it failed, they'd only pay $5,500. But if you had a $3,500 a month pension, they would pay $3,500 even if the pension has gone bankrupt. Another big consideration in retirement, health insurance. When you turn 65 in the United States, you can enroll in Medicare. And Medicare is supposed to be simple, but it is one of the most confusing things that people have to deal with when they turn 65. So I'm going to go over the basics of it. First off, you have the different parts. Part A is for hospitalization. This covers your hospitalization expenses. If you get Medicare at age 65, it's generally free. If you don't sign up for it at 65, there's a penalty that's permanent that grows every year by delaying enrolling in Part A. So almost everyone, even if they're still working, should enroll in Part A at age 65, even if you haven't filed for Social Security benefits. Part B is what covers your doctor visits. Part B does have a premium. The base premium right now is about $135 a month. Now, if you're still working and have group health insurance from a large employer, you generally can delay enrolling in Medicare Part B. As long as you're covered under that group plan, and then you can prove it when you do enroll, you won't pay a late enrollment penalty in Part B, and you don't have to pay that premium. So you generally always want to enroll in Part A when you're eligible, 65, and Part B, you want to enroll at 65 unless you're covered by a large group plan. And that doesn't necessarily have to be your job, it could be a spouse's job. You just need to be covered underneath it. Now, in addition to hospitals and doctors, we also have Part D, prescription drugs. And so there's a prescription drug plan where you buy an extra policy for a premium, and generally, like Part B, you enroll in that when you're not covered by a group plan at 65 or older. And Medicare has gaps. There are pieces that Medicare doesn't pay for. And so there are specific Medicare supplement plans or gap plans that are available. You'll commonly hear these referred to by their letter names, F or G, and they're specifically designed to fill in the gaps where A and B leave off. And then they have a separate monthly premium, and they're provided by private companies. The other option, instead of getting a gap plan, is to get a Part C, which is a supplement that replaces those other pieces and becomes your more traditional HMO type insurance. You have a more restrictive list of doctors, and it's more of a managed care experience, but is generally less expensive. So if you want maximum choice, you probably should stick with traditional Medicare and get a supplement plan. If cost is the biggest driver, you're very healthy and not worried about it, you may want to go with a Part C plan, which replaces the Part B, the supplement plan in Part D. One other thing to note is if you start off on traditional Medicare, you can always go to a supplement plan. But that's a one-way street. So if you're unsure, you probably want to start with a supplement plan and then switch to the Medicare Advantage plan in the future if it gets too expensive and you don't like it. But you can't go the other way most of the time. So when you're in retirement and you have your health insurance and you're emotionally ready, you got your activities and you've gotten used to life, now you need to figure out how to get the money to actually pay for all this stuff. And when you're working and somebody says, hey, I'm going to give you a bonus, you don't say to them, you know what, it's not good for me this year, it'd be better next year, can you just hold on to that and pay me? You take the bonus, you pay the taxes on it. But when you're retired, you have a lot more control over how and when and where you receive your income. So it gives a much better opportunity to plan around how you're going to access funds in your retirement to fund your retirement. And there's really typically three major buckets that you want to think of. There's taxable money. This is kind of like a bank account or just an investment account that you put money in and bought stock or bonds. Everything that happens in that account is taxable. Then you have your 401k, traditional IRAs, stuff that you put in pre-tax, got a deduction while you were working and has been growing in those accounts since you put it in, traditional IRA and 401k. When you take that money out in retirement, it's taxable just like ordinary income, just like you earned it from a job. And the third bucket is the Roth IRA and the now newer Roth 401k, which means you put money in retirement savings and did not take a deduction. You never got a tax benefit for doing it. The tax benefit is that it grows tax-free, and if you wait until 59 and a half, is tax-free for life. So you have the ability to fund these three different buckets in your working career, and when you have the ability to choose where you receive income, it affects the way those things are taxed. So I apologize for the numbers, and I don't know if you guys can read it with the way it's on the screen, but I'm going to talk through how things are taxed. And I'm going to give some examples. And the taxable account, that first one that I spoke about, is probably the most important one or the most complex one to understand. So let's say you buy a stock, whatever the stock may be. I'll give an extreme example. I have a client who was an early round investor in Rackspace, another Trinity, a company started by another Trinity alumni that has done fabulously well. His investment worked out really well. And he put $50,000 in the company, and when he ultimately sold the stock, it was worth millions. And that gain was not taxed like he made it at a job. It was taxed as what's called a long-term capital gain. And at the time, he only had to pay a 15% rate on that gain. Had he earned that money from a job, he would have been paying almost 40%. So he was much better off getting capital gains treatment on that investment than he would have for paying what's called ordinary income. Had he used money from his IRA to purchase the Rackspace stock many, many years ago, he'd have a really big IRA when he'd have to pay that much higher tax rate to access that money later. So even though he had a tax shelter he could have used, in that circumstance, it would have been better, and it was better, for him to have used taxable money that was fully taxable. Because all the years he owned Rackspace, he paid no tax. It was only upon sale. Additionally, if you own corporations, corporate stock, that have, most of the time, U.S. corporations have this treatment, but the dividends they pay you are what are called qualified, which means they are also taxed at a preferential rate. So if you can receive those types of income in your taxable account, you can actually come out ahead than having that in your IRA. So what's important to learn here is that generally, if you're going to invest in stock, where you're hoping the stock's going to go up in value or it pays dividends, oftentimes owning that outside of a retirement account can be better from a tax perspective. In an IRA, it's very simple. You got a deduction when the money went in, and there's no tax on anything that happens inside the IRA. When you take the money out, you have to declare that as income on your tax return and pay whatever the ordinary rate is on that income. With a Roth IRA, there's no tax on anything that happens inside of it or when it comes out, as long as you're 59 and a half. Now bonds, unlike stock, and bonds are typically purchased not because we think they're going to go up in value, but because they pay bond interest. And that interest that they pay, just like a interest you'd earn on a bank account or a CD, you have to pay taxes on that every year. So if you're going to choose to own a bond, it's better from a tax perspective to have it in a retirement account. So when you think about how you're going to access your money and where you're going to invest your money, it's important to pay attention to the type of account you're investing in. Is it a taxable account? Is it a traditional IRA? Is it a Roth IRA? And you can put investments in those accounts and improve the tax outcome by positioning them correctly. Some other key distribution considerations when you're thinking about retirement. So tax brackets right now over the next 10, 20 years range anywhere on ordinary income from 10 to 39.6%. Currently, the 39.6% rate doesn't exist, but in 2026 it's scheduled to come back. Those were the rules in 2017, but the new tax code that's in place now runs all the way through 2025. And essentially what happened is the brackets were reduced and changed. And this is really good for married couples because the brackets used to go 10%, 15%, 25%, 28%, 33%. Well, now the 15 is 12, the 25 is 22, and the 28 is 24. But if you look at this chart, you'll see that the 24% bracket, the blue line, is a lot bigger now. So essentially, if you have income, it's not as expensive to get it out, which might indicate that you should more heavily pull money out of an IRA during lower taxation so that you don't have to take it out later at higher taxation. And you can pull a lot more income at that lower rate. So paying attention to tax brackets can be very important to thinking about how you want to smooth your income over time. And I always give an example. If you're a starving artist and you don't make anything for 19 years, but then you write a best-selling book or have a piece of art that sells for $1 million, you have $1 million income in 1 year. The IRS is going to tax you at a very high rate on that $1 million of income, where you have somebody else who makes $50,000 a year over the same 20-year period. They also made $1 million, but they're going to pay a much lower rate because it's stretched out. So you don't want big spikes in your income. If you were to buy something in retirement or need a lot of cash in 1 year, it may make sense to take money out before you need it, to take advantage of tax brackets and tax code so that you have the money available to pay for the expenses. So you really want to avoid those big spikes and think about your cash flow needs, not just now, but in the future. Another consideration is taxation of Social Security. I talked about Social Security not being 100% taxable. So in this example, you have a couple that is collecting Social Security, and that's not enough to live on, so they access money from their IRA. If they take out $45,000, then the taxation of their Social Security benefits is only 55%. If they take out another $10,000, $55,000 out of their IRA, they have to claim $38,300 as the amount of Social Security. So not only do they have the $10,000 they took out of the IRA, but they have an additional $8,500 of Social Security that they have to claim. So in this circumstance, the additional tax created by that $10,000 distribution is 22.2%, where they're only in a 12% tax bracket. And that's because they're being taxed on $18,500 of income, not on the $10,000 distribution. And then if they took another $10,000 above that, they get to the full taxation, 85% of their Social Security, and they've moved into a new tax bracket. So for that next $10,000, the effective cost to take it out is over 30%. So paying attention to how your Social Security is taxed And where you are in the brackets, again, can give you a huge amount. You would think, looking at this, I'm in the 12% bracket, I'm in the 22% bracket, that's what it cost me to take money out of my retirement account. That's not always the case. Some other distribution considerations are capital gains and qualified dividends, that preferential rate we talked about. And this really centers around the fact that if you're in the lowest two tax brackets, 10 and 12%, your rate on capital gains is 0%. And if you have some capital gains and qualified dividends from your portfolio, you can find yourself in a situation just like Social Security, where as you add additional income from taking money out of your IRA, you have to pay taxes not only on that income you withdrew, but the capital gain that was being taxed at 0 is now being taxed at 15%. So in this example, we have somebody who takes $30,000 out of their IRA. They don't pay any capital gains tax. When they go to $40,000, they now have to pay just the $10,000 for that $1,200. But now, when they're moving their income up out of that bracket, those long-term capital gains get pulled in. So they have to pay 15 on the capital gain and 12 on the IRA distribution, making the effective cost 27%. And they're only in a 12% tax bracket. And sometimes this can happen at the same time Social Security is being taxed and can push those rates up even higher. So just being aware of them and talking to your CPA and thinking about what you need can be very beneficial. Itemized deductions. Here's another huge change that has really changed how people will file their tax returns and the tax benefits. So in 2017, you would add up your medical expenses that exceeded 7.5% of your adjusted gross income. You'd take your mortgage interest, your property taxes, your state and local taxes, professional fees, CPA fees, investment advisor fees, lawyer fees. Add all those up, and if they were more than the standard deduction, you would take that. And if they were less than the standard deduction, you would take the standard deduction. A lot of taxpayers who itemize are somewhat familiar with this. The big change in 2018 is that not only has the standard deduction effectively doubled, making it much harder for your itemized deductions to exceed the standard deduction, but there's been a cap and elimination of some of those. So if you were paying a lot of state income tax, that's now capped at $10,000. If you were paying a lot of property tax, that's now capped at $10,000. And if you were paying a lot of both of those, then those combined are capped at $10,000. Also, if you had lawyer fees, CPA fees, unreimbursed business expenses, or investment advisor fees, those are no longer deductible at all. So it's much harder for people to claim deductions, and the amount of the deductions has a much higher bar to hit. So a lot of people who used to itemize may not be itemizing anymore. And then another consideration of income, and this is kind of a stealthy, almost backdoor tax, is Medicare premiums. So when you have total income in retirement, the IRS reports that to Social Security, and they will actually increase your premiums for Part B and Part D after they receive your tax return information. So if your income as a single is $85,000 or less, and that's total income, that's your AGI, and then they add back in any tax-free interest that you may earn. So really think of it as any income you earn, not just taxable income or even AGI, which a lot of people are used to thinking about. If you have $85,000 of total income or more, you're not going to pay $134 for Part B. You can pay as much as $428 a month for Part B if your income is over $160,000, and then you have additional surcharges on your Part D premiums. So you could potentially be paying almost $500 a month for your Medicare based on your income level. And for married, it's double all of those limits. So understanding those limits, and again, being cognizant of where you're pulling income from, you can dance below these numbers and save yourself a significant amount of money. And these numbers have been accelerating at an extraordinary rate. Pretty soon they're actually going to start adjusting to inflation, but I've seen these these thresholds get lowered in dollar amount and the premiums be increased. And the reason for that is Medicare is supposed to be 25% covered by the premiums. And in order to pay for Medicare and its spiraling costs, I expect these numbers to increase. So paying closer attention to what are called IRMA surcharges on your Medicare premiums is another important thing to think about as a retiree. So when you're retired, a lot of people think about paying off the mortgage. Should I be debt-free in retirement? And that's great. There's pros and cons. So the big pros of not having a mortgage, it's asset protection in a lot of states. I know in Texas we have great homestead asset protection laws. And obviously if you don't have a mortgage, you don't have to pay as much. You don't need as much cash every month. And it just feels good to have a paid-for piece of real estate. But having a mortgage potentially can give you tax benefits, harder currently with the new itemized deductions, and that money that you would use to pay it off could be invested in earning more money. So which one should you do? Well, if you're a lower risk investor or you have a high interest mortgage, those both point to paying off your mortgage. If you have risky investments and you expect a high return and you get tax benefits for it, potentially you may want to carry a mortgage. I always tell people do what feels right and comfortable. As long as you're doing one or the other, you're probably okay. If you're just spending the money on taking trips and have a mortgage, it's probably not the right answer. Another thing that's available to retirees is reverse mortgages. So when you have a home and it's paid off or almost paid off, you can actually get a reverse mortgage, which is kind of like how it sounds. You can actually reverse the situation. Instead of you paying a mortgage payment, you can actually receive a payment every month. And instead of the balance owed on the house going down, it now goes up. It could be, I'm going to take out a reverse mortgage and not have to make any more payments on my existing mortgage, or it could be, I'm going to take out a reverse mortgage and get paid. They can be structured in a lot of ways. They generally have a really high cost to get into, so you don't want to put a reverse mortgage in place and then leave the house shortly thereafter. But if you want to stay in your home and you need resources, it is an option. I always think of it as a last resort, but it's important to know that if you have an expensive home that takes a lot of, that you need a lot of money to maintain lifestyle, it's another option. People get more interested in their final documents, estate planning documents, and what happens if I can't take care of myself. And they see friends who pass away or have more medical issues. So people typically become more interested in this, even though everybody should have these documents in place. But typical things that you should consider when looking at estate planning documents: powers of attorney. There's two types. There's a medical power of attorney and a business power of attorney. And these essentially are granting authorization to somebody else to be your attorney in fact, to authorize them to make decisions for you. If you're incapacitated, or sometimes not, just unavailable, if you're out of the country or you're indifferent, you can use a power of attorney to handle business affairs. And then if you're incapacitated, who makes medical decisions for you? So having those documents properly executed makes it a lot easier for those people to step in and make those decisions. You should also consider having guardianship nominations. So the legal way of taking over somebody's affairs is to go to court and say, this person can't make decisions for themselves, I should be their guardian. And it's not a inexpensive or fast-moving process, but you can nominate who you'd want to be that for you if that happens. And then a directive to physicians, also sometimes called a living will, which was made famous by the Terry Schiavo situation. Do you want all measures taken to keep you alive, or do you want to be made comfortable when you have a terminal and irreversible condition? Putting those wishes in place eliminates the confusion, and it's probably most important for the person who actually makes the decision, because then they're not having to decide, it's you deciding. And when you think about all that you've accumulated in life and transferring it to your heirs, there's several ways to do it. So there's passing it by title. Most common example would be a house. Most married couples have joint tenants with rights of survivorship, which means the survivor of the two automatically gets full title to the house upon the death of the other. Another passing by title would be trust. So if you have a trust document and the trust owns that piece of real estate, it passes through the trust. It doesn't have to go through probate. Another common way that assets transfer is by beneficiary designation. So if you have a 401k, an IRA, a life insurance policy, and you can even set this up on some types of other accounts, you've elected that if I die, this is who I want to receive the asset. And then the last one, which is one that people really don't understand and oftentimes scares them, is probate. And that's the legal process of transferring things from one person to another. If I sell my car to somebody else, I can sign the title. If I'm not here to sign the title, who signs it? Well, the probate process is that process. An executor is appointed. Usually you nominate them in your will. That is appointed by the court to act as you, and that executor is the one who's now authorized to follow the instructions of the will and sign their name to transfer assets. Now, I see all the time people set up a will where they've outlined who gets what and why, and then they go about their lives. But it's so important that all three of these things, how you title things, how you set up beneficiary designations, and what it says in your will, are coordinated. Because if I set up a trust for my children, if my wife and I pass away and they need to be raised, and I've named them as beneficiaries of my life insurance, it doesn't go into that trust. It goes to them. They're minors. They can't control that asset. Whoever gets guardianship of them controls that money. If they're a good guardian and they hold all the money and they're a good steward, as soon as my kids reach the age of majority, they get all that money. I may not want that to be the way it goes. So it's very important when you have an estate plan to think about how you have your beneficiaries set up, how you have your titling set up, and what the will actually says. And then trusts, another confusing part. And there are lots of ways to structure trusts, but the most basic element of a trust is that it allows you to split three separate parties that normally exist in all of us. You have the grantor, the person who sets it up and funds it. You have the beneficiary, the person who benefits from the assets. And then you have the trustee, the person who controls the assets. And then how you set that all up dictates all the things that a trust can do. But fundamentally, it allows you to separate those powers and make all kinds of specific elections to meet specific goals. And now, I'd like to open it up for questions. I don't know if you have any questions, Dean, or if anybody's...
Well, let's see if any of our alumni who are participating in the webinar today have any questions. If not, I have quite a few actually. Sparked my interest in both estate and financial planning, and brought up some topics that I was not really familiar with. I was just going to ask you, Ben, one of the things that piqued my interest was the windfall tax for, or the windfall reduction benefit, I can't remember the exact name of it, for Social Security. Are there any strategies for dealing with that to reduce that over time, or is that just something that we have to accept?
Well, so the windfall elimination provision is a little bit different than the one I touched on, and the government pension offset, which is what I talked about, affects spousal benefits.
Okay.
The windfall elimination provision affects worker benefits. So if you have somebody who earned a Social Security record and they also have a government pension, there's a calculation which is basically trying to balance how much they paid into Social Security. So if you've worked and earned what are called substantial earnings for 30 years or more in Social Security and have a government pension, there's no interaction whatsoever. But if you have less than 30 years, there's a sliding scale from 20 to 30. There's a partial reduction of that worker benefit. And you have to have at least 10 years to get any Social Security benefit. But if you worked a part-time job in addition to your government pension, if you only worked 10 years after you receive your government pension, it's a way to kind of compensate for the fact that you didn't pay in as much as someone who actually worked 35 full years. But if you did both, then there's no reduction whatsoever. And the maximum reduction is about $500 a month. So it's generally not a huge swing, even for those that are subjected to it.
And how would I get more information if I wanted to find out if my Social Security benefit's going to be affected by any of those variables?
Well, besides finding a Social Security expert, which is easier said than done, you want to. There's a good worksheet that Social Security puts out. If you Google windfall elimination provision, WEP, windfall elimination provision, then it will show you what are substantial earnings. If you take your Social Security record, on the right hand of the inside of the page, it'll have your earnings by year, and you can count how many years are substantial, and then it will tell you what your reduction is in that worksheet.
Excellent. And Ben, I see that we have quite a few questions coming in at this point, so I'd like to shift to our alumni participants. And Lori just says, thank you for the information. Very good presentation. Catherine asks, you may have addressed this, but how does the Roth 401k work, and how is it different from the Roth IRA?
Well, a Roth 401k is very similar to a Roth IRA. A 401k allows you to contribute more money. If you're under 50 years old, you can put in $18,500 into a 401k and $5,500 into a Roth IRA. If you're over 50, it's $24,500 and $6,500. But there's income limits to contributing to a Roth IRA. From a tax perspective, they're essentially identical, but generally with a 401k, you can contribute more, and there's no income limits. So if you find yourself in a high income tax situation, you may not be able to contribute directly to a Roth IRA. And in both cases, you have to have earned income. It can't just be any income. It has to be income earned from work.
All right. And Kathy asks, she didn't have time to copy the email address for a copy of the presentation, but says, please put that slide back up. Do you have a slide? There we go.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And we'll make that available for anybody who wants to download the presentation, the slides. We'll make that available on the website. So when this will be recorded and will be available. When we get that up, we'll make sure to put the presentation there and make it available.
Excellent. And Karen asks, can you please speak a bit more on starting with a traditional Medicare Part D and a Medigap, and not then being able to easily move to an Advantage plan later?
So you can move to an Advantage plan. You can't move back. So if you're not sure which one you want, I'd recommend starting with a gap plan and a Part D and seeing how that works for you. It's probably more expensive than an Advantage plan would be, and then you can always switch to an Advantage plan later. But once you switch to an Advantage plan, you can switch to a different Advantage plan, but you can't go back to traditional Medicare after you've gone to the Advantage plan.
Okay, so you're pretty much locked in at that point.
There's some limited circumstances, but for the most part, yes.
All right. We have a question from Marla. If I have creditable medical coverage from my employer and I'm turning 65, do I have to sign up for Medicare Part A, or can I wait until I'm 66 and apply for both Medicare A and B? My employer will provide proof of creditable coverage.
Well, I would still enroll in Part A at age 65. There's no cost to it. I would delay enrollment in Part B until you retire, because you may or may not actually retire at 66. As long as you have credible coverage through your employer, then I would delay enrollment in Part B until you need it. And there's no cost to A. Just be careful when you enroll through the Social Security website that you don't also apply for Social Security at the same time. But their website has gotten a lot better and less confusing in the last few years.
All right. Robert asks, if one spouse retires after age 65 and is on Medicare, but the other spouse is under 65 who no longer receives health care because they were covered on the retiree's employer coverage, what options are available?
Great question. So if you've ever heard of COBRA coverage, which is what you get when you change employers and need to keep the health insurance, you have to pay the full cost of COBRA coverage, but Normally, COBRA is available for 18 months, but for dependents, it's 36 months. So if you retire, you can actually keep your spouse on your previous employer's plan for 36 months. You have to pay the premiums, but they have that eligibility. If that's not enough time, or the plan's too expensive and you'd rather do something else, the next best option at this point is going into the exchange and buying one of the plans. There's some off-exchange plans, if she's healthy, that she may make sense, but I would probably first go with COBRA, next into the exchange, and then look at the off-exchange plans only if she's extraordinarily healthy.
All right. And Joe asks, can you contribute into a Roth IRA after you retire and are not earning income?
No. Any retirement plan that you put money into, there has to be earned income. An IRA, even if you have income past 70, you can't contribute. But with a Roth IRA, you can. And of course, with a 401k, you can contribute if you're still working.
All right, Ben, I've got a couple more questions for you. What do you see as the top few issues that come up routinely with your clients in your practice of financial plan? I want to note that you're a certified financial planner. So my guess is you see the gamut of issues that one might encounter when they're planning.
It really varies. It always surprises me what is driving a client to come into my office. Sometimes it's taxes. Sometimes it's fear about retirement. Sometimes it's issues with children. Sometimes it's their investments. I mean, it really just depends on the situation. I think retirement is a big driver. There's so many moving pieces. People don't have the time to make up for mistakes. That I think that's probably the number one thing people are worried about. Do I have enough to retire? You know, what questions am I not asking? Those are probably the most common questions that I get. But we get into Social Security a lot with those kind of questions in retirement. That's a major theme. And clients don't generally ask about taxes, but that usually makes me the most excited because there's a lot of value that can be created by tax planning.
All right, and you mentioned in your last slide, before we went into the questions, about having your estate plan in place. What do you do in that case? Do you recommend other professionals, such as lawyers or accountants, or how does that work? Or does a financial planner work with you on all those individual items? How do you put it all together?
Well, the only people who can draft trust documents, wills, powers of attorney, those are legal documents, are attorneys. And I always recommend looking for someone who spends 90% or more of their time doing wills, estates, trusts, probate, works in this arena, because there's so many practical situations that an occasionalist doesn't really think about. And a lot of attorneys will I'll do a will for you, I'll handle that for you. Just the other day, I have a client whose spouse has Alzheimer's, and when the insurance company found out about it, they shut down internet access, shut down telephone access, even though they know the wife is power of attorney. They said everything has to be in writing. We'll respond by mail and you have to send it to us by mail. They just made it very difficult to work with them unless they get a court-supervised guardianship. And that is the reason you set up a power of attorney, to try to avoid that situation. So having a good qualified attorney who can ask good questions, draft the documents correctly, and understands the practical implications of what happens after you leave their office and the paperwork is signed, so important to getting a good estate plan.
Okay, and so say that I've got the estate plan put together, I've got my financial plan together. How often do I need to come back and review what I've got in terms of my retirement funds, in terms of the various assets that I have and the like? Is that something that's done annually, or once I do it, can I just let it go for the next 5 years?
I would say an annual review. is the minimum. Just because things change, you don't think about it. Oftentimes in a discussion, we don't expect a change that needs to be made, but just sort of catching up, we discover something that needs to be done. But there are circumstances that can accelerate that. A change in job, disability, death, marriage, all the things in life, all the moving pieces. If there's a big change, there can be ripple effects. And it's always better to get ahead of a change than trying to clean up after one. So the review process is really triggered by circumstance, but I think it's a good thing to sit down once a year and kind of just do a review and make sure your goals and tax strategy and investments all kind of line up together, and if estate planning changes need to be made or insurance needs to be made, changes need to be made, that you have that opportunity to review.
Let me refer another question to you, Ben, from Kathy. She says, how long before you plan to retire should you make the plan? How many years in advance? My guess is that's a difficult question, but
I mean, generally, it's as soon as possible. You know, people who start thinking about retirement and contemplating it, you know, in their 20s and 30s, generally are in the best spot when they get to their 50s and 60s to actually retire. Most people don't honestly think about saving or about retirement until they're in their 40s or 50s. So the sooner the better. When I work with young clients, it's really hard for them to tell me what retirement's going to look like. They're still adjusting to what work and family's like. But you want to have a reasonable sort of target that you're shooting for. How much do I need to save? Even for a young family, what are we doing with college? Do we have to save for that? What are we doing for, you know, our own budget? How much is reasonable for us to build our lifestyle around, and how much has to go to savings, just so that when we do get to 60 or 65, 70, whenever we are targeting about when we don't want to have to work anymore, what's a reasonable amount of money to have? You're going to come up with much more. If someone's 65 and they come into my office, they tell me, you know, every last detail of what they want to do. But I don't know what my retirement's going to look like, but I can estimate what a reasonable budget would be and what it would take to save to that level. So the sooner you start on that kind of planning, the better, but people don't usually get serious about it till they're in their 50s.
Excellent. Let me ask one more question, and then we will see if there's any more listener participant questions and that will be coming in. But one of the things I was thinking about as well, listening to you, many of our alums may have other kinds of investments. Mutual funds, for example, would come to mind, or maybe they have investments in, you mentioned stocks and bonds. How do those things figure into your entire retirement plan, in addition to your pension and your Social Security and your homeowner's mortgage?
Well, typically they're a big part of a lot of people's retirement. The main way we've been able to access the capital markets, we get to become owners of thousands of corporations just by buying an ETF or a mutual fund. And as those companies produce profits, as those companies grow, we share in that, and that income helps supplement our own lifestyles. So it's an important part. But when you think about risk and how much risk you should take, it changes through the life cycle. So when you're young, inflation is a huge risk. If you don't grow your investments enough, they won't provide you with the income you need later. Whereas as you get closer to retirement, generally you should take less risk, because if the market were to drop right before you retire, it might change your retirement plan. And if it dropped right after you retired, you couldn't even delay retirement to make it happen. So I've seen this in college savings accounts. Clients that in 2008 still had the really aggressive allocations from their newborns in their college savings accounts, and right as they're about to go to college, the value of their accounts, half of it evaporated. You know, sorry, you get to go to 2 years of college, not 4 years of college now. So looking at how much risk you have and how it fits into your life cycle is really what you want to do. And we're fortunate in the day and age we live in. Building diversified, low-cost portfolios is pretty easy to do now compared to before, using mutual funds, ETFs, and some of the more sophisticated tools that are available. Technology has really made that much easier now.
Thank you, Ben. If Our alumni participants have any additional questions, they're, looks like, able to contact you via
Sure.
email, telephone, or should I say, even say U.S. mail will be available. But Ben, we really appreciate your being here today.
Thank you.
For the financial planning retirement basics. I learned quite a bit myself. I want to thank our alumni from all over the country, from outside the U.S. as well, for participating. This is a wonderful learning together programs that are offered by our alumni office. And we look forward to our next webinar, which is scheduled for September 24th at noon, Central Time, featuring General William Souter, class of 1959, former clerk of the U.S. Supreme Court, discussing the U.S. Supreme Court, its future after Justice Anthony Kennedy's retirement. Thanks again. We're just winding down the lunch hour here in San Antonio, and we hope we've given you a lot of food for thought during your lunch hour, and we look forward to seeing you here back again on September 24th.